And on with our speaker today. Please welcome Ruth Patrick.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Doug. Thank you so much for the introduction. Just taking a moment to get situated. All right, I'm so happy to be here with you today, and I'm so happy to see so many gentlemen in the audience. And thank you for being open to hearing about this topic. Whenever I give a talk in front of a mixed audience, sometimes there's this feeling it's like going to be a male bashing event, and I promise you it's not going to be. This talk is for you to take home and share with your loved ones, male and female. Domestic violence happens to 1 in 3 people on the planet. So if it hasn't happened, like if you have not experienced it, it happens to men as well, then chances are it's happened to someone you know. And you may not even know that it's happened to them because it's such a shameful secret in middle to upper income areas. That's the focus of my program, women in middle to upper income areas dealing with domestic violence. But I also work with men as well. I get about 1 per year. And over the last 7 years, I've worked with over 1,300 women. So I want to share with you some stories and some of what I've learned after working with all these survivors. Just a word about what I do. So the program is called WomenSV, Women of Silicon Valley. And we focus on providing services in middle to upper income areas where it's not supposed to happen. And the survivors we work with, they tend to be married to doctors, lawyers, engineers, professional people that are doing very well. You'd never guess they had this other dark side. So we run a helpline, we run a support group, we go to court, the police station with them. We connect them with resources depending on what they need. So it's all about supporting them and educating them through the whole process of what they're dealing with. We also do a lot of presentations. Like last week, I was at the Rotary Club a couple weeks ago here. Sorry, did I mention that? And we do trainings for professionals, for doctors, for therapists, for court staff, for law enforcement, to raise awareness about this issue so they can be more trauma-informed, dealing with their clients, their patients, their students. Last year was quite a good year for WomenSV putting this issue on the map, the issue of domestic violence in affluent communities where it's not supposed to happen. We're just better at keeping the secret. So I was on the Megan Kelly Today Show. You can, before her fall from grace, you can type in my name, Ruth Patrick, Megan Kelly, and you'll see the clip. I was also in the New York Times and on Good Morning America, and I was honored to receive the Jefferson Award for public service from CBS KPIX affiliate in San Francisco. So it was a really wonderful year in terms of putting this issue on the map, that domestic violence happens regardless of what your income is, regardless of what neighborhood you live in, regardless of what your profession is. Just a few disclaimers before I really dive in. I'm a teacher by training. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a therapist. In fact, I do classes for therapists and attorneys. I'm going to be talking about a very small subset of abuser, the affluent abuser. Most people, I think you'll agree, most people who have power and money and wealth and status are good people. Like everybody, like most people are good people. But there's that small percentage at the far end of the bell curve that use their power and money and influence and status to control, to manipulate, to coerce. And I'll share with you some stories that will illustrate that. But I'll tweak some of the details to protect the innocent and the guilty. And I do want to repeat that and acknowledge that men can be victims of domestic violence as well, and women can be perpetrators. But because 85 to 95% of domestic violence happens to women, when I talk about victims or survivors, I'm going to use the pronoun she. And when I talk about perpetrators, I'll use the pronoun he. But I do want to acknowledge that it works in both genders. It can happen to both. And the stories I'll be sharing with you are just that. They're stories because we lack data. We lack statistics on this population where it's not supposed to happen, because the places that keep statistics, hospitals, police departments, domestic violence agencies, these are the very places that women in middle to upper income areas tend not to seek out help from. Let's acknowledge that 1 in 3 women on the planet will be raped or beaten during her lifetime. 1 in 3. So think about your family members, your daughters, your sisters, your mothers, your cousins. If it hasn't happened to you, it's happened to someone you know. So what is domestic violence? We think about it usually in terms of physical or sexual terms, but it's this pattern, an escalating pattern of power to control, the abuse of power to control another person. And it can be beyond physical and sexual. You don't have to lay hands on someone to terrorize them. Look at all the ways you can control somebody and terrorize them. Any behavior, domestic violence includes any behaviors that intimidate, manipulate, humiliate, isolate, frighten, terrorize, coerce, threaten, blame. Didn't have to touch that person at all in order to instill fear in them and to control them. It's all about power and control in many different areas, intimidating them, towering over them, lashing out verbally towards her, isolating her from her family and friends, minimizing, saying, I never said that, or you're taking it too seriously, if he's making fun of her in public, telling her to get a thicker skin, turning the children against her, becoming a tyrant in the home, putting her on an allowance, threatening her in subtle ways or more direct ways. We'll see more about, learn more about that in a moment. So much of it happens behind closed doors, and you drive through these fancy neighborhoods like Portola Valley and Atherton and Los Altos Hills, and there may be this sense of envy if you don't live in one of those homes in one of those 5-acre estates. But I've had ladies who said there is no one there to hear you scream, and there are places there that don't get cell phone coverage. It can be pretty lonely. When you're living under those circumstances, the power and control you had over your life slowly gets eroded, gets washed away. And your home, that's supposed to be a sanctuary, becomes this prison, this cell, this cage. Evan Stark calls it coercive control, which is a liberty crime, depriving someone of their fundamental human right to be free and safe in their own home. It's every woman, every man, every child's right to be free and safe in their own home. And please don't make the mistake of thinking that domestic violence is an adult issue only. It impacts children. Abuse is a learned behavior. And children grow up learning how to control and coerce and manipulate and threaten by watching how their parents behave. We have this idea that domestic violence doesn't happen in the nicer parts of town, or if it does, well, she should be able to look after it herself. She's got resources, right? Not necessarily. Often he's taking total control of her finances. But we grow up in this culture of affluence, and we think about what's involved in this culture of affluence. Typically, the child is going to pick up a good sport, pick up a sport, do well at its school, pick up an instrument, excel at that, do well with his grades or her grades, get into a good school. You're not going to air your dirty laundry or talk about things that are happening at home. You've got to keep up appearances. Image is very important in our demographic. They're going to the kids are going to go to a good school, they're going to marry somebody from a similar background, settle down in a nice home, and continue to climb that ladder of success. So what part of domestic violence fits that picture? There's Dr. Martin Macneill with his family. We'll talk about him later, but there's also Pamela Anderson and Tommy Lee, who was Pamela Anderson, survivor of domestic violence. Nicole Simpson, did not survive. And this other family, that's the family of Dr. Martin Macneill. Anybody can be a victim. Anybody can be a perpetrator. The ladies that I work with are engineers, doctors, professors, lawyers, psychologists, entrepreneurs, CEOs, religious leaders, stay-at-home parents. And guess who their abusive partners are? Engineers, doctors, professors, lawyers, psychologists, entrepreneurs, CEOs, religious leaders, stay-at-home parents. In a way, it's almost the most egregious form of abuse to be someone in the healing profession, like a physician or a psychologist, therapist, and start to get inside somebody's head and use their knowledge to coerce, control, and threaten. We have this idea in our head about what a typical abuser looks like. We look at all these people here, and who strikes you as being the most likely candidate to qualify as a domestic violence abuser? And here's the hint. What's that fellow wearing in the middle?
White beater.
Thank you. Go to the head of the class. But every single person on this rogues gallery has been found to have committed domestic violence, some the ultimate act. And you notice also, not Kiwanis, the Rotary Club president in the lower left-hand side. So power and control dynamics, they cut across all socioeconomic levels. But here's the deal. The more money, the more power you have, the more influence, the more tools you have at your disposal to exercise that power and control. At the Rotary Club talk that I did a few weeks ago, a gentleman came up to me afterwards and he said, you know, I think it might be even more common in our demographic because we have more tools to coerce and control and to hide it. So the more money, the more power you have, the harder it is for a woman to leave safely, to stay safe, to keep custody of their children, and to maintain anything like her former standard of living. So let's take a look at what a typical affluent abuser looks like. I'd like you all to put your therapist hats on for a moment. Do we have any therapists in the audience? Well, let's all pretend to be therapists for a moment. Because when I do this talk for therapists, I say, I'm not allowed to use diagnostic labels, but you are, and please tell me at the end what kind of diagnostic label you would apply to these characteristics, okay? So you all heard these labels. I'm going to list the characteristics of behaviors, and you be thinking about what kind of, if you were a therapist diagnosing this person, what label would you put on them? Okay, so here we go. Highly educated, advanced professional career, very public positive image. They look good on paper, present well in public. They often are involved in volunteer or philanthropic work. They might give to worthy causes or coach their son's soccer team. They're also charming, calculating, manipulative. They come from all races, all religions, all countries are represented. You see, you come to my support group meeting that looks like a United Nations meeting. They tend to define their career in terms of, they tend to define their children in terms of their GPA, the things they've accomplished. Here are the things that motivate them: sex, money, winning, revenge, power, control. They've got a grand sense of who they are, sense of entitlement. It's all about them. It's their show, 24/7. They're good at convincing other people that his partner is the crazy one. She's the abuser. You've got to dig beneath the surface, examine the history to find the truth here. Now here we're getting down to the real meat that was going to help you with the diagnostic label. They tend to lack empathy. They tend to lack remorse. They tend to lack self-reflection. They tend to lack conscience, any kind of moral compass. They almost seem to enjoy causing pain or fear to the very people they should be protecting the most, partners or family. They lie easily. They lie often. They lie convincingly. They lie even when they don't need to. It's like they just want to keep in practice. They'll include little details of truth in with the lies to make them look more credible, sound more credible. They blame their partners for everything, never take responsibility for anything they do themselves. They totally lack self-reflection or accountability. They'd be the last to label themselves abuser. They're very good at playing the victim. They're very good at shaming others, but God forbid you should shame them. You could be taking your life in your hands. And they tend to view relationships in terms of war, business, chess. What do I mean by that? War, once the relationship ends, it's like, I will destroy you. I've heard that comment over and over again reported by my ladies. Take no prisoners. One of my ladies called it the scorched earth policy. He's out to destroy every aspect of her being. Business, it's like relationships as business transactions. What's my return on investment in this kid? What's his GPA? day? Or, wife, how much have you earned? What have you done for me lately? So what, you're going through chemo. Get the dinner on table on time, or I'm going to trade you in for a newer, fresher model. Very sort of objective, analytical, what's in it for me? What have you done for me lately? And chess, very good at thinking several moves ahead, back to the calculating, manipulative part. So with all those characteristics in mind, do you have any ideas, if you were therapists, what would you diagnose our patient as having?
Narcissism.
Thank you. Anything else?
Sociopath.
Thank you very much. Go to the head of the class. Yeah, sociopath, psychopath, narcissist. Not all sociopaths and psychopaths are running around robbing banks and being serial killers. Some of them are surgeons. So here's an example. G for short. He grew up in San Jose, a victim of hate crimes. He went on to create a very successful company in Silicon Valley, sold it for several $100 million. He went undercover and donated $35,000 to a human trafficking and domestic violence safe house. He was on Charlie Rose, Oprah Winfrey, and Oprah is singing his praises, saying, "Oh, and you single girls, waiting for the other shoe to drop." Domestic violence conviction twice, caught on camera in his penthouse, hitting and kicking his girlfriend 117 times. It took a couple of years to bring him to justice, and the second time, another girlfriend, he was caught and finally taken away. So an example of emotional abuse in Silicon Valley. A lady was asked by her attorney, "Why don't you let me fight harder to get a fair settlement for you? I could do so much more than you're letting me do." And she said, well, she was still living with her husband at the time. He was a physician. She was living with him throughout the divorce. Why? Because he'd taken control of all the finances. She said, well, you know why I don't let you fight harder to get a fair settlement for me? You know what he told me the other night over dinner? He said, do you know there's more than 40 ways to kill a woman and make it look like she died from natural causes? You didn't have to come out and threaten her directly. She got the message. And that's a story, yes. But here's one that made the news in Utah. Remember Dr. Martin Macneill with his 8 children? Doctor, lawyer, bishop in his local church. He pumped his wife full of drugs, making it look like she died from a heart attack. He had previously bragged he could do that to a former mistress, saying he could kill somebody and make it look like natural causes. And here's, after he was arrested and brought to justice, what his daughter said: "We're just so happy he can't hurt anyone else." He ended up committing suicide in prison. Dr. Martin Macneill. My dad was a doctor. I have great respect for physicians, but in any profession, you can have somebody that abuses their power, their knowledge. And here's what a domestic violence victim looks like anybody else, any other lady. You can't tell. Why does she stay? Often there's an element of shame involved, secrecy, silence. She's afraid to tell anybody. She doesn't want to admit failure. She may be totally financially dependent on him. He may have threatened to render her homeless if she leaves. Maybe she wants to keep the family together. Maybe she thinks she can fix it. The smarter she is, the longer she'll tend to stay. And she may be afraid of what will happen if she tries to leave, because most domestic violence incidents happen after a woman leaves. After. And she may think she's safe because she's out. But he's losing control. And sometimes he will do whatever it takes to get that control back. The more money that women's partners had, the more afraid they were, thinking that if he didn't kill her directly, he could hire somebody to do it for him. Here's Ed Dow, wealthy developer in Los Gatos. His wife got a restraining order against him. This is the blonde lady. He would beat her for buying a new dress or putting highlights in her hair. She did get a restraining order. She was afraid, still very afraid of him, afraid of what he might do to her or their children. He ended up, in spite of the restraining order, killing their son and then himself. Apple employee Juliana Arias, the finance manager at Apple, stabbed by her husband Christmas Eve a couple of years ago. Kaiser employees, one physician, killed by their partner. And then we have the whole technological abuse piece. I've had many ladies who've been stalked electronically. One was pursued by a drone. One was turned into a literal prisoner in her own home, having these electronic locks where her husband would change the codes every day. Another lady stalked in every room of her house. Her husband had put hidden cameras in the light fixtures, in the ceiling vents, in the smoke detectors. Even Barbie can be turned into a surveillance device. Dolls like this are banned in Germany. Stalking, huge red flag when there's domestic violence. In cases where women have ended up being killed by their partner, 80% of them have been killed, have been stalked prior. So threats with an intimate partner should be taken very seriously. Sometimes you think your every move is being watched. You can look paranoid, well, because your every move is being watched. Financial abuse is very common, being put on an allowance, punished for overspending, forcing her to make early withdrawals from her IRA account. So things to look for in his behavior. We have handouts here that have a list of behaviors if you want to come, if you want to get a copy of them afterwards to take a look at. If you want to share this with your wife, if you're concerned about maybe a relative of hers or your daughter, a cousin, what to look for early on in the relationship. Does he move in quickly, sweep her off her feet? Does he shun her, give her the silent treatment? I call that silent violence when he's upset with her. Does he blame her for everything? Is he sarcastic? Does he tease her in front of other people? Is he checking in too frequently? It looks like love in the beginning. Over time, it can look like stalking. Is he very jealous or suspicious when he finds her talking to other people? How does he talk about other women, past relationships? How is he on the road? How is he around money? In public, is he very charming? Is he very comfortable being the center of attention? Could be just comfortable being the center of attention and a really good guy. But he may also have to be the center of attention. He could also be introverted, so not every one of these is going to be like hardcore, but they're things to look at. Does he interrupt her, talk over her? If she becomes the center of attention, does she get punished later? Does he look like he's making all the decisions in the relationship? Changes to look for in her. Is she losing her self-confidence, getting more and more isolated, losing interest, no longer participating in the activities she enjoyed before? Is she missing time from work or school? Is her performance being affected? Are children showing signs of ADD or ADHD? Sometimes it's because of the way their brain works differently. Sometimes they're thinking about the chaos and trauma that are happening at home. Is she starting to medicate with drugs or alcohol or food? She gained a lot of weight, lost a lot of weight. Is she minimizing, denying, looking scattered or forgetful? Remember, the shame keeps them silent. Does she appear to be afraid of upsetting her partner? Does she behave differently when he's around? Does she over-apologize? She may be very good at keeping up appearances. Children, survivors, women, and men can all be very good at keeping secrets. So be careful what you say. Please don't tell her that she should leave or put pressure on her to leave before she's ready. She'll end up going back or making mistakes that will bite her in the end. Don't judge her. Don't blame her if she decides to stay. Don't say there's two sides to every story. There are not two sides to every story when there's abuse involved. No one ever deserves to be abused. Don't recommend couples counseling. Watch out for that, because that can be turned into a tool to manipulate her. Don't pressure her to get a restraining order. And don't say, but he seems so nice. Don't judge a book by its cover. Here's 6 things you can say to someone you're concerned about. I'm concerned for your safety. I'm concerned for your children's safety. I'm concerned it will only get worse. You don't deserve to be abused. No one deserves to be abused. It is not your fault. You are not alone. I'm here to help you. I can find someone who can help. They can call me. I've got cards and brochures. There's brochures on the table too if you want to take one. Can I just ask you in closing, how many of you, thinking about all the different forms of abuse I've talked about, technological, financial, emotional, even legal, dragging her back to court over and over again, physical, sexual, how many of you know somebody that you think has been affected by some form of domestic abuse? Could you just raise your hand for me? And look at that, no matter who I give this talk to, whether it's a cozy group or whether it's 1,000, almost every single person in the room raises their hands. So I hope after hearing my talk today, you'll go home and spread the word. Talk to the people that you love. Talk to your colleagues. Talk to your co-workers. Talk to the people who are important to you and help spread the word. Domestic violence can happen to anybody. There is something you can do. Please help them break the silence. You could save a life. So thank you. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Have you seen women with her abuse go from one abusive guy to another abusive guy?
Yes, yes, and often they'll get sort of the reputation of some kind of masochistic kick they're getting out of it, or they think they don't deserve any better behavior. But what happens when you're getting to know somebody, everybody's on their best behavior. You can bet if a woman goes out with a man and he punches her in the first date, she's probably not going to go on a second one, right? So they all start off in the honeymoon period, where it's all nice, hearts and flowers, he's being very nice and charming. She falls in love with that Dr. Jekyll. She doesn't recognize the early warning signs. We need to do a better job teaching our children, our young girls and boys, how to recognize signs of emotional abuse. Is he controlling? Is he trying to order for her in a restaurant, tell her what to wear, what to eat, what to do, who to see? These are things we need to recognize early on. Is he texting her 50 times a day? Without that, without being able to recognize those signs, you're like a little frog in the pot on the stove, you know? It starts off, it's all happy in the pot, but degree by degree, before you know it, you're swimming around in boiling water. So if she hasn't learned to recognize those early warning signs in the first relationship, she could become vulnerable to finding somebody else who's much like that in the second one. So that's why education is the key. One of the things I want to do is get into the schools more and talk to kids, elementary, middle, high schools, about healthy relationships, teen dating violence, and what to do if you find yourself in an abusive situation. So thanks for the question. Yes?
Yeah, just curious, your stories were mostly one-sided. And I'm just thinking Hollywood, I'm thinking Gone with the Wind, where they're both abusing each other. You know, that scene where she's beating him up, he beats her up. And then they're like, oh, we're so happy because we're both abusing each other. So
Because we're both what?
We're both abusing each other, and even though in the moment, we're beating each other up, like afterwards we're just so happy because that's just us as a couple. We're beating each other up. So do you see that? Is that just Hollywood?
Oh, yeah, thank you for bringing that up. There's different types of violence and domestic abuse, and I talked about one type today, but you're right, there's a type called common couple violence, where the conflict goes back and forth and power is more or less shared equally, but here's the key. One partner is not afraid of the other. And Hollywood, did you ever see that movie Carousel? It was a musical. There's a very disturbing scene in it where the actress is saying, if you are hit by the man you love, it doesn't hurt because love conquers all. That's wrong. So yes, there are cases even where women initiate physical abuse. But in most cases, it's the male who initiates it. In most cases, 85 to 95% of domestic violence victims are female. And in most cases, there's a power imbalance. In most cases, she's afraid of her partner. She's walking on eggshells, living in fear. So you want to think about what's going on in the relationship. In Gone with the Wind, Scarlett wasn't afraid of anybody, honey. So that was Hollywood. But I'm talking about women who are living in fear every day of their partners, and what he's going to do to her, to the children. Yeah.
Particularly men, do they come out of abusive families themselves, so that's the norm?
Yes, a very good point. Exactly. Abuse is a learned behavior. They learn at the master's need. So sometimes, you'll see it on the playground. You'll see kids acting in kind of a bullying fashion. Sometimes they are imitating the behavior of their peers or something they saw on TV. Sometimes they're imitating the way dad treats mom, or sometimes it's the way mom treats dad. So yes, it's learned, and it can be unlearned, but only with great motivation and the ability to do self-reflection, to feel empathy for the person you've hurt, and to value the relationship above one's own selfish needs. So, and to have remorse, being sorry for what one has done. And so I'm describing, remember when I said, what's the list of characteristics here? And you gave me back, psychopath, sociopath, narcissist. These are character issues we're talking about. This is who they are. So it's like, it's like wrapped up in their identity, but it gets learned at an early age. Anybody else have any other question? Yes?
Yeah, I just wanted to share, we had a friend who just disappeared, and we thought maybe the husband had killed her. He was a surgeon, and I called up, my friend was a police officer, and we were really concerned, and we were about to have, and she showed up. But sure enough, she had been hiding from him, but then she decided to go back, even though she felt like she was, possibly in a crazy situation. So I just wanted to highlight that it's sort of very confusing for friends to know what you're supposed to do.
You're bringing up such an important point. There's something called the cycle of abuse. There's the hearts and flowers stage where everything's all nice and he's charming and it's all good. And then there's this feeling of walking on eggshells of tension, and then the shoe drops and he does something violent, scary. And then there's a cooling off period where he either apologizes or promises not to do it again, or he goes back to being nice. And it's that part that hooks women into the relationship. He goes back to being the man she fell in love with. And all the promises and the nice behavior and the things she remembers from early on get revisited and instill new hope in her. And this is false hope, because if she stays in this type of relationship, inevitably the pattern will repeat. But it creates something called traumatic bonding, which is a much tighter bond to break than if he was just mean all the time. It's intermittent reinforcement, right? Every now and again, it goes back to being nice. And it's like a torture victim who's offered a glass of water. Over time, that glass of water takes on such deep meaning. Over time, it can turn into something called Stockholm Syndrome, where she's so grateful for any attention. It's all about him. She's all about placating him. And especially if she's been taught and isolated from all her friends and family, as your friend was, and then brainwashed to be made to think that she can't make it on her own, she'll be nothing without him, that he will hunt her down and kill her if she leaves. She might as well make the best of it. He's promised to change. All these things, these are all invisible influences that you as friends will not be aware of, but living on a daily basis with someone like that, it's like becoming a prisoner of war. It's also like getting sucked into a cult, where you've got this charismatic leader that's trying to exorcise your view of reality and replace it with his. It's very powerful, and
But you're not supposed to talk that friend out of leaving their marriage.
well, the problem with putting pressure on her to make a decision is typically they won't listen, or if they do and something bad happens, then they'll blame you afterwards. What we do at WomenSV is we lay out options, we give suggestions, we work collaboratively with survivors. If you say, you've got to get out of there, you've got to do this, you've got to, she's in a vulnerable position because she's gotten used to being told what to do. She's lost her own sense of autonomy. But if you can, if you've reconnected with her in some way, if you can invite her to call me, I'll give you my card. Just sort of very gently introducing to her, what does emotional abuse look like? How are you feeling in this relationship? What is it doing for you? You may remember the type of person she was early on, and what's happened to her now. You can see a lot of it in her own, daily demeanor. Anxiety, depression, PTSD. She's self-medicating it all. So by educating her, by offering resources, safety planning at all different levels, emotional, financial, legal, she can start to see options. Many women stay in a relationship like this because they don't see a way out. When you say her partner's a surgeon, I've had several of my ladies whose husbands are physicians and even surgeons, and they have lived like prisoners, and some of them have ended up in jail when they told their husbands, their partners, their physician husbands that they wanted to leave. He scratched himself, he called the police, he told them she did it, she ended up in jail. Another one, she told her husband that she wanted to leave. He started to look like he was going to attack a neighbor. He told his wife, go get the machete. She didn't want to because she knew he didn't like the neighbor. He made motions to go and get the machete. She ran to head him off, picked up the machete to hide it. While she was doing that, he called 911 and said his wife was having a psychotic meltdown. Please save him from her. He and his wife and his sister worked on the legal authorities and the psychiatric authorities to convince them that the wife was mentally ill and needed to be on a psychiatric hold, and she was put on that. So these are the potential risks that women face in trying to escape from a relationship like this. There's no easy way out, and it requires careful planning along with deprogramming. and outside support. I often say as hard as it is to live with an abuser, it's almost impossible to leave without outside support. You need to compare your current reality, what you're living in, your new normal, with what's really normal. In one of my support group meetings, I had a lady say, my God, he comes in at 2 in the morning and he pounds on the bed and he's yelling at me for hours, and then I have to get up and go to work the next day, and I'm losing it. And then another lady in the group says, what, you mean that's not normal? My husband does that all the time. So you see, they get to check out the perspective with one another. That's the isolation piece that happens when your friend disappeared. So we could work on her and get control over her and isolate her from her ability to check out her reality with perspectives of other people that are living in more normal, healthy relationships. Long answer, but really important question. Yes?
Where do you get your support? Financial as well as, how do you get referrals?
Oh, yeah, thank you. One of the reasons why I do presentations is I often get referrals from presentations. People come up to me afterwards and say I'm concerned about, and I give my number to them. From ladies I've helped, as said, I've worked with over 1,300 women in the last 7 years. They tell their friends, people that they're close to, if they're in trouble. I do trainings for physicians. I'm developing a great relationship with Kaiser, so they are referring patients to me. Law enforcement, I do patrol briefings all over, and then police stations will refer women to me. Therapists and attorneys refer people, so I get lots of referrals. And then in terms of financial support, we don't charge for our services because we firmly believe it's every woman, every child's right to be free and safe in her own home, and she shouldn't have to pay for that right. It's like, you know, if somebody's attacking you in your home, you call the police and they come and save you, hopefully, and they don't send you a bill afterwards. That's our guiding philosophy. The practicality is it takes money to run the program. So we do a fundraiser every year. We have a wonderful benefactor who rents the Los Altos Golf and Country Club for us to have our fundraiser. We invite individual donations throughout the year. So, and sometimes when women have graduated from the program, they'll give back. So,
One more
thank you.
question?
Thank you so much.